Mr. Twit gets a horrid shock. Mr. Twit, who thought he'd seen his ugly wife for the last time, was sitting in the garden celebrating with a mug of beer. Silently, Mrs. Twit came floating down. When she was about the height of the house above Mr. Twit, she suddenly called out at the top of her voice, "Here I come, you grizzly old grunion! You rotten old turnip! You filthy old frumpet!" Mr. Twit jumped as though he'd been stung by a giant wasp. He dropped his beer. He looked up. He gasped. He gasped again. He gurgled. A few choking sounds came out of his mouth. "Ah!" he said. "Ah! Ooh! I'll get you for this!" shouted Mrs. Twit. She was floating down right on top of him. She was purple with rage and splashing the air with her long walking stick, which she'd somehow managed to hang on to all of the time. "I'll swish you to a swazzle!" she shouted. "I'll swish you to a swizzle! I'll nash you to a nozzle! I'll nosh you to a nazzle!" And before Mr. Twit had time to run away, this bundle of balloons and petticoats and fiery fury landed right on top of him, lashing out with the stick and cracking him all over his body. The house, the tree, and the monkey cage. But that's enough of that. We can go on forever watching these two disgusting people doing disgusting things to each other. We must get ahead with the story. Here is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's house and garden. You see it? Very strange. Some house. It looks like a prison, not a window anywhere. "Who wants windows?" Mr. Twit had said when they were building it. "Who wants every Tom, Dick and Harry peeping in to see what you're doing?" It didn't occur to Mr. Twit that windows were really meant mainly for looking out of, not for looking into. And what do you think of that ghastly garden? Mrs. Twit was the gardener. She was very good at growing thistles and stinging nettles. "I always grow plenty of spiky thistles and plenty of stinging nettles," she used to say, "to keep out nasty, nosy little children." Near the house you can see Mr. Twit's work shed. To one side there is the big dead tree. It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from the tree you can see the monkey cage. There are 4 monkeys in it. They belong to Mr. Twit. You'll hear more about them later. Hugtight sticky glue. Once a week on Wednesdays the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds and Mrs. Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. On the day before Bird Pie Day he would put up the ladder against the big dead tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hugtight, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint it along the tops of all the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around to roost for the night in the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, that the branches were all smeared with horrible Hugtight. The moment they landed on a branch, their feet stuck, and that was that. The next morning, which was Bird Pie Day, Mr. Twit would climb up the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck to the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were. Song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little Jenny wrens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. And there's a picture of the bird pie.